They are the teenagers of the brown bear world, trying to discover their place on the Brooks River. Along the bustling rivers and streams of Katmai National Park and Preserve, bears in all stages of life work to make a living. Boars fight amongst each other for better positioning. Sows with cubs balance the need to fish and protect their young. Subadults find themselves stuck in the middle. Just a year ago, many were with their mother feeling confident. Now they are discovering how to be successful on their own. This is Brooklyn White, a park ranger with Katmai National Park. Joining me is Mike Fitz, the resident naturalist with Explore.org. Thank you so much for being with me here today.
Great to speak with you always.
Now, before we explore the life of subadults, it's important to identify who we're talking about. Mike, I feel like we throw around the term subadult quite often, but could you tell us what really makes a bear a subadult?
Yeah, that is a term that we use frequently, but maybe isn't defined as frequently as it should be. A subadult bear, excuse me, I'm getting bit by a biting insect here. There we go. A subadult bear is basically just a juvenile bear, separated from its mother, but it's not fully mature. So, for example, they're not sexually mature, and they're generally quite young. They're usually, for brown bears, between 2 and 5 years old. They can often be difficult to tell apart from older cubs, and they sometimes show many of the same physical characteristics. So when you're looking at a subadult bear, you want to look for a lanky body, small-bodied bear overall. They're undergoing growing spurts, so some parts of their body appear out of proportion overall. So you can look for big ears or a really big head or really long legs. Some of those things can help you to tell whether or not you're looking at maybe a young adult bear or a subadult bear. And even compared to cubs, you know, they can be comparable in size to older cubs. Young subadults, though, are generally not small bears. You know, relatively speaking, when we think of a subadult bear, you know, we often think of them as small, and compared to the adults, they are. But in Katmai National Park, even young subadults can weigh 300 pounds or more by the end of summer. So compared to the average person, they're not small animals. And when I have the opportunity to go to Brooks River, or I've worked there in the past, and I'm walking down the trail and I run into one of these young bears on the trail, it serves as an immediate reminder to me that these are substantial animals in their own right. But in the bear world, they're young, they're still growing, and they're undergoing a lot of changes in their life. In Brooklyn, we can think of subadulthood really as a process of physical growth and maturation, but there's much more to it, especially behaviorally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like many subadults are in this point where they're trying to figure out, where do they fit? Where do they belong on the Brooks River? And it's so many ways they really are at the bottom of that kind of hierarchy chain. You know, when you're looking at how the river is set up, you've got bears that are utilizing the falls, you've got bears that are really confident in where they are. And so many subadults end up being really kind of left to figure out how they can utilize the river on their own. They're now responsible for being able to feed themselves, especially subadults, their first year emancipated, where they previously were able to rely on a sow for maybe supplemental milk or scraps of fish that she had caught. Now they are solely responsible for being able to survive. And so when they're on their own, it's really difficult. So I feel like oftentimes we see subadults kind of find a posse. They find a few other subadults that they're able to spend time with, to work with. And it's almost like that idea of safety in numbers. If they've got, you know, somebody with them, they're less likely to get into an altercation, or they feel a little bit bigger. And so they are able to utilize that kind of confidence they gain from having another subadult or a few other subadults with them to be able to be along the river. We've also seen subadults that may den together. So not only are they spending time during the summer and fall together, but they then may even continue in winter together as well, to have additional protection or to spend more time. But we also see this playful side of subadults when they're together. They were cubs, and now cubs, are playful and fun. But when they then are with other subadults, they still have this playful nature, this curiosity, and we see them playing together. Play can be an interesting thing, though, because sometimes it looks very aggressive, and yet we're like, oh, are they fighting? And there are some ways that we're able to distinguish, is this subadult like challenging another subadult, or are they just, having fun? Are they, having a moment to relax or get out some stress that they were feeling or nervous energy? So oftentimes when they're playing, it's very quiet. You don't have as many vocalizations as you would if bears were truly fighting each other. Because when bears fight, you know that you can hear them from miles away. Just it's so loud and explosive. So it's interesting to see, though, that this playful nature is still aiding them to be able to find a place along the river, because it truly is practice. That playtime is practice for if they were to have to defend themselves or to be challenged by another bear, they at least know how they can move their bodies, and what they need to do to be able to defend themselves. So even that playful nature is going to ultimately aid them in the future. But it's interesting how those kind of interactions change then when they meet other bears along the river, especially sows with cubs. Do you have any examples of bears, especially subadults, interacting with sows and cubs?
Yeah, it's interesting to watch how these individual independent juvenile bears are trying to navigate their world, and often they're quite unsure about how they want to do it. And I think in a moment here we'll pull up a clip that I think provides a good example of just a couple of bears, or the ways that subadults can sometimes interact with family groups and not in a friendly way. This is an example of 503. You see him just moving into the trees right now, chasing away a young subadult bear. And this is in 2014 when he was still being cared for by 435 Holly. And you can see Holly trying to keep up with her family as they're displacing this other young subadult bear. And that bear was unsure about itself. Maybe it just I can't remember the specific situation that led to 503 chasing that other bear away. But cubs, they're good at reading the body language of other bears as well. 503 may have seen some hesitation in that other bear, some submissiveness in that other bear, and decided to test his own limits of dominance and chase that other one away. So when you have these older cubs, for example, backed up by mother, knowing that they have a bodyguard, they're a bit more bold, and they're able to sometimes exploit that to their advantage. And this is the beginning of that interaction, where you can see that subadult kind of like looking back, not running away at a full sprint, but definitely not comfortable with the close proximity of 503, and then also the spring cub at the time, 719, following along. So sometimes the interactions with family groups aren't friendly. I should say probably most of the time, subadults are going to try to keep their distance from those bears, just because they are, like you said, the lowest ranking bears among the bear hierarchy. So it's always kind of fun to watch how they navigate that terrain overall, especially with family groups. But sometimes, Brooklyn, this year, I think we've been seeing some different dynamics happening between family groups and subadults this year, and it may have to do with a lot of salmon in the river. But you've seen some examples of that, I think, recently.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up 435 Holly and that interaction, because it's been so interesting to then see how she's handled her spring cub and other subadult bear interactions. It's been a very different story. You've seen that cub being allowed to play with the subadult and having a lot of just play time. Multiple times this season already, we've seen that kind of opportunity, which is very different than the interaction that we saw in that clip before. Sows typically are much more protective of their cubs when it comes to subadults. An independent bear coming up is potentially a threat. They don't know the intentions of that bear, and so very often they're going to be pushing that individual bear away. But as you mentioned, cubs that have a mom behind them are way more confident than a cub that would be on its own. And so when you're looking at the way that subadults may act around these sows, they still want to potentially play with a cub, but they're not confident enough to jump right into that situation because they don't know how this adult bear is going to respond to that. So to see that a single adult bear could have very different reactions is even more confusing to a subadult, because then they really have no idea how they're supposed to be responding or acting around these bears. But it does speak to that desire to, again, be interacting with other bears, to be social, and to be very curious, even if it may get them into trouble a few times. But even more, we see this very different attitude of subadults when it comes to interacting with larger boars. Those adult male bears on the river who are at the top of the hierarchy. They are the ones that really call the shots along the Brooks River. And so subadults have to be very cautious when they're interacting with boars, just because there is such a higher risk of injury or being pushed out of areas. So we'll sometimes see subadults that are making their way along the river, and when there's an open spot, they're going to go try to fish in a new area, maybe fish at the top of the falls or below the falls, areas that are typically reserved for those bigger bears. But if you see those larger bears there, those boars, the subadults are going to be moving away. They do not want to have an interaction with those larger adult bears, because they understand that watching the posturing or those things that they've learned from play or being with their mother when they were a cub, seeing those bear signs, the way that they truly communicate, are able to help keep those subadults safer when they're potentially in an area where they may interact with one of those boars. So it's interesting then, to look at how bears utilize the river. We have lots of different ways that they do that. And as I mentioned just a little bit ago, subadults are going to be not getting those prime fishing spots that are typically reserved for those adult bears that have more of a presence along the river. So we typically see them resorting to dash and grab techniques in areas that are further down the river. So they don't get the chance to fish typically at the falls, even though this guy did get an opportunity. But they are running around the river, dashing for salmon, trying to grab them in areas that are a little bit harder to fish. Sometimes they're successful, oftentimes they are not, like this video shows. But they're trying to figure out, how do I utilize the river in the best way that I can? How am I able to get those calories I need working along the river to be able to make that living and ultimately make it to hibernation? It's so interesting to watch them play, do that dance and take chances when they can. Sometimes we see bears move into those better fishing spots when they have an opening. And so that's allowing them then to test the water, see, okay, am I able to maybe move my way up that kind of chain of command. Or maybe I won't be successful and I'll get pushed away. Either way, they are working at being able to take advantage of opportunities that they see. And that's one of the coolest things about subadults, is that sometimes we see them being absolutely fearless when it comes to utilizing the river. And as we see here, this guy climbing the falls. What a fun and interesting way to try to, make your way and use the river.
Yeah, I think the subadult years are definitely one of exploration for a lot of these bears, as you were discussing, and they're also opportunists as well. You said that there's not a really great chance for them to utilize the falls in a lot of years, especially in years where we have fewer salmon moving into the river. The salmon run this year in Brooks River was just so exceptional that it opened up these opportunities for subadults to practice fishing in places where, if there were fewer salmon or even a more typical salmon run, they just wouldn't have that chance. So this year, I think all of those bears, they're really just poised to try to take advantage of those opportunities as best they can and explore different ways for to make a living along the river. And as they grow into adults, we'll see them, mature, and they'll gain skill and confidence. We'll see them transition from bears who seem like they can barely fish, bears who just hover on the fringes of falls, into skilled anglers and very dominant bears over time. And I want to throw out a few examples of some of those bears that I've seen grow and mature into from like from a subadult bear or a borderline adult bear into very successful adult. One of the first ones that I want to bring up, for example, is a bear that we've come to know over the past few years in the bear cam very well. She's bear 128. A lot of you know her by her nickname, Grazer. This is her on the left in 2008, although she received her current ID number in 2009. So some of the bear monitoring information says that she was first ID'd in 2009, but that's her in 2008 on the left. So kind of thin, lanky, but you can still see that she had some poofy ears, so she kept that characteristic into adulthood. When in her first few years of independence, she was not a very good angler. She wasn't often, tried that dash and grab technique. She wasn't very successful. But now she's one of the most skilled adult females at fishing at Brooks Falls, and maybe one of the most skilled adult females fishing, really, or adult bears fishing anywhere. So that's one example of this maturation process that we're seeing taking place. Number 32 Chunk is another bear that I have been able to watch, kind of grow from a chunky subadult. That's kind of how he got his nickname. He always kind of had a big butt on him, even when he was younger. But he still faced a lot of competition in those younger years. He couldn't fish, at Brooks Falls. He was often, hovering on the fringes. So that's him in 2007 on the left. And now he's grown into an extremely large adult. And that photo is one that Ranger Naomi took of him this year. So he's one of the largest bears on the river. And he's a bit of an enigma in a way, because he's retained some of those juvenile characteristics in some ways, because he's also interested in playing with other adult males on occasion. And that's not something that we see bears of his age partake in very often, but we've seen him do it a little bit this year. And then lastly, I want to talk about the mighty bear 747. I didn't get to see him when he was a very young bear, but on the left, this is him in 2004, and he was described at that time as a small subadult. And he was looking through the bear monitoring notes that I have from that year. He was relegated to fishing the island downstream of the falls, the cut bank area, and even the lower river. So he was definitely shoved to less productive fishing spots at that time. And it's really hard to imagine 747 having to, to be forced to fish less productive fishing spots, because right now he's one of the largest bears on earth. And he can access really the best fishing spots anytime that he wants. So all of these bears that we're seeing, these younger bears that we're seeing at the river right now, dozens of these subadult bears are going through this same process that these successful adults went through earlier in their life. And Brooklyn, I'm kind of interested to know if there are any of these young subadults that we're seeing this year along the river that you're particularly interested in watching.
I definitely have a few, and there are so many, it's really hard to narrow it down. But I have two in particular that have continued to capture my attention. And it may be because I'm a little biased, and seeing them grow up along the river, my 4 years being there physically, just brings me, some joy. But 25 and 26, they were emancipated by 435 last year. And so that was their first year to really be independent bears. And it was so fun to see them continue to come back together. They were almost always together, side by side, fishing, playing, just bounding around the river. And I remember, seeing them apart, and I'd be like, oh, where's 25 or where's 26? And I saw one of them come over the closed trail, and the other one was standing by one of the platforms. And you saw them both sniff the air, and they're like, wait a second, is this the bear I think it is? And then they ran together to join each other down in the river and then fish together. And so it was so fun to see that playful attitude and still being cautious. Like, I need to recognize that this is the bear that I know, but then being able to continue to spend time together. So it'll be interesting to see if when they decide to separate, to distance themselves, to really become independent from each other, because they're not going to be besties forever. But it has been an absolute pleasure to watch them continue to work the river together, even out of cubhood into this subadulthood. What about you, Mike? Are there any bears that you are watching and waiting to see what they do?
Yeah, it's hard to choose. But I narrowed it down to two just for this chat. But similar to 25 and 26, I'm also curious to follow the story of a couple of sibling subadult bears. They're actually older than 25 and 26, but they're number 909 and 910. So they're siblings, thought to be the offspring of number 409 bead nose, and they both have bead nose ears, big ears, similar faces, so fairly recognizable along the river. And I still remember the first time that I saw these bears when they were independent. It was their first summer apart from mother. I was standing on the wildlife viewing platform at Brooks Falls, and I looked across the river, and I could see two young bears up in the forest on the far bank. And they had been brought to the falls by their mother often when they were together, including the previous year. And so they knew that there was food there. They knew there were fishing opportunities there. But when they looked down at the river, they didn't have mom with them anymore. And that scene just looked very intimidating because they both stood on their hind legs. They huffed. I could hear them huffing really across the river, and they just ran off into the forest. Slowly over time, though, they gained confidence. They gained skill. They were less likely to run away from other bears and more likely just to kind of give them a little bit of space and look to squeeze into open fishing spots. So we saw them venturing to the lip occasionally, and now they're both very skilled on the lip of Brooks Falls, catching salmon there, just like their mother. And we also saw them innovating maybe even new fishing techniques. You saw one example of or one photo, I think it was of number 910 earlier, standing on her hind legs, trying to catch fish in her arms. And she actually did it successfully a couple of times last year. I don't think she's done it this year. Maybe she's found some easier fishing techniques since then. But I'm interested to follow their story again of maturation and learning as they mature into adulthood. And maybe a lot of both of those bears will come back with their own cubs as they mature into larger adults. And I think it'll be very curious to see if they utilize those same spaces that they are right now, and to see how tolerant they are of one another. Like you mentioned with 25 and 26, they may be very tolerant of each other right now, but we're seeing that 909 and 910 are starting to become less tolerant of one another as they age. So those are a couple of bears that I'm looking forward to watching mature into adults over the next few years. And as we, progress towards our conclusion here, Brooklyn, I did want to bring up, one final point about our sub-adult bears, our teenage bears, because, physically and behaviorally, sub-adult bears are analogous to human teenagers. So while we focus on this stage in a bear's life, we can also compare it to sub-adulthood in our own lives. Now, this is sub-adult Mike, circa 1996, rocking a mullet there, but I'm also not comfortable in my own skin. So I'm still really trying to find my place in the world, developing my own personality, my own disposition. And I remember this time really as awkward and uncomfortable. As I gained independence, I tried to navigate my world. But this is a life stage, sub-adulthood is a life stage that we share with bears. It's full of strife, it's full of change, challenge, growth, exploration, and maturation. That was long before I understood that bucket hats were the best hats. It was long before I knew that I needed glasses, long before I was fully physically mature. But that's a stage, of life that all humans go through to become adults, and it's a stage of life that all bears go through to become adults.
It really is amazing how we can observe such striking similarities in the ways bears experience life to the way that we do. I mean, growing up is hard no matter what the circumstances. Whether you're a young person trying to figure out who you are, who you want to be, and how you're going to get there, or if you're a young bear working to find your place along the river and ultimately trying to survive. I mean, there are growing pains and habits that we all have to grow out of as we enter into adulthood. And bears experience that same shedding of youth as they transition into maturity. Um, but maybe we can learn a thing or two from these young bears, even in the midst of growing up and becoming adults or being adults ourselves. They are able to find some time to play. And I think there are a few of us who have already figured out this balance, a way to work and play, because we have a few art contest winners to announce.
Yes, we do. And thanks, Brooklyn, for leading this conversation about subadult bears. It's an important story, I think, to convey to our audience, and it's been really fun discussing it with you today. Before I announce the BearCam Art Contest winners, I do want to also remind you, if you haven't taken the BearCam viewer survey, please do so. It's take a few minutes of your time, but you can find a link for that in the featured comment at the bottom of the page. But at the end of July, Explore.org asked you, our audience, to share your BearCam inspired artwork with us. And we received dozens of submissions. All artwork we received is posted in a gallery found at exploreorg.smugmug.com. And again, that's exploreorg.smugmug.com. All written entries, such as poems, short stories, and essays, can be found in the latest blog post on Explore's blog, and that's blog.explore.org. And we'll also post those direct links in the comments at the bottom of the page. The top 20 favorites, as chosen by Explore.org staff, will receive a custom coffee mug featuring an illustrated bear of your choice. And we also have a special grand prize to announce. But first, let's play our slideshow of our coffee mug recipients. And collectively, we were so impressed with everyone's effort that we decided to award 5 people with a grand prize, a special hour-long Zoom call with me, yours truly, to talk about your BearCam inspired creation and chat about the bears. So I hope that's a good prize for our grand prize winners. We'll be in contact with everybody, including the winners of your custom mugs, just like this, in the near future. But I do want to go through those 5 grand prize winners with you right now. So congratulations to Karen Banks for her short essay about Bear 610. And congrats to Sarah Smith for her watercolor painting of a bear cub. Congratulations to Sarah Terry for her illustration of Bear 482 and 747, who we frequently saw together in the river last month. And congrats to Felicia for her series of wood burning illustrations. And then congratulations to Kayla Sawyer Stein, I hope I pronounced that name right, for her poem, Villanelle for the Bears at Brooks Falls. Thanks to everyone who shared their art with us. It was a collective decision by the staff to choose the winners. And while I can't speak for everyone on explore.org, I know my favorites, choosing my favorites out of all of them was an incredibly difficult decision. So, so it was really great to see everyone's submissions. It was wonderful to see how the bear cams have inspired the creativity of so many people. And we face a lot of challenges in our lives, both collectively and individually, just like subadults do. And there's a lot to lose sleep over in the human world right now. But although I sometimes lay awake thinking about things when I should be sleeping, I eventually rest a little easier knowing that so many people are inspired by the bear camps. So again, Brooklyn, thanks so much for joining me today. And my name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. Have a great day, and I hope everyone stays well during these challenging times.